The moon hung low in the night sky, casting eerie shadows that danced across the empty streets. Amber streetlights flickered intermittently, adding to the sense of unease that had settled over the neighborhood. Inside the modest two-story house on Willow Street, Emily had just finished locking the front door. She glanced out the window, her heart racing slightly at the sight of the desolate street. It had been a long day, and all Emily wanted was to unwind and forget the stress that had been building up. She made her way to the cozy living room, the soft glow of the television providing a soothing backdrop. The clock on the wall read 10:30 p.m., and with a sigh, Emily sank into the plush couch. As she flicked through channels, her mind began to wander, contemplating the recent news about a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. Her street had remained untouched so far, but the unsettling feeling that someone could be lurking just beyond the walls sent shivers down her spine. She dismissed the thought, chiding herself for allowing fear to creep in. A sudden noise from the kitchen interrupted her attempts to relax. It was just a creak, like the sound of a floorboard settling under pressure. Emily's breath hitched, and her eyes darted to the entrance of the hallway that led to the kitchen. She strained her ears, listening for any more sounds. Silence hung heavy, yet the sensation that she was being watched persisted. Summoning her courage, Emily slowly got up from the couch and moved towards the hallway. Her footsteps were barely audible on the carpeted floor. With every step, the tension mounted, and she found herself clutching the edge of the hallway wall for support. The kitchen was dimly lit, the faint glow of the refrigerator's light casting eerie shadows across the room. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the room, her eyes darting from corner to corner. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the feeling of unease only deepened. Just as she was about to turn away, a rustling sound echoed from the back door. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, almost unwillingly, Emily turned her gaze towards the door. The window on the top half of the door allowed just enough moonlight to filter in, revealing a vague silhouette on the other side. Frozen with fear, Emily watched as the doorknob turned ever so slightly. Her mind raced, and adrenaline surged through her veins. Without thinking, she backed away, her heart pounding in her ears. She needed to call for help, to alert the authorities, but her phone was in the living room. She had to think quickly. Emily moved as silently as possible, retreating to the living room while keeping her eyes trained on the hallway. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, her hands fumbling with the keypad as she dialed 911. She whispered her address, her voice barely audible as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. As she hung up, she looked back towards the hallway, her heart sinking when she saw a figure stepping out of the shadows. 2 figures, to be exact. The moonlight revealed their faces, pale and hauntingly expressionless. They wore plain, worn-out clothes, and their eyes seemed to reflect the dim light in a way that sent chills down Emily's spine. The intruders moved slowly, deliberately, their gaze fixated on Emily as they advanced towards her. Panic surged within her, and without thinking, she darted towards the staircase. She knew she had to get to the second floor, to lock herself in a room and stay hidden until the authorities arrived. Her footsteps echoed through the house as she sprinted up the stairs, the sound seemingly magnified in the tense silence. Emily's mind raced, her thoughts a jumble of fear and desperation. She reached the top of the stairs and hesitated, glancing back down to see the figures still following, their movements eerily synchronized. She pushed herself forward, her legs carrying her to her bedroom. The door was just within reach, safety tantalizingly close. With trembling hands, she slammed the door shut and locked it, her breath ragged and labored. She could hear the muffled sound of footsteps on the stairs, growing louder and closer. Emily scanned the room for a place to hide. The closet seemed like the best option, a tiny space where she could remain out of sight. As she squeezed herself into the closet, she heard the sound of her bedroom door being forced open. Her heart pounded in her chest, drowning out all other sound. Minutes stretched into eternity as she crouched in the confined darkness, her breath shallow and rapid. She strained her ears, listening for any signs of movement outside the closet. There was a sickening feeling of dread in her stomach, the realization that her life hung in the balance. Time seemed to blur, and the sounds of the intruders searching the room eventually grew fainter. Emily dared not move, her muscles tense and cramped. It felt like an eternity before the distant wails of sirens reached her ears, growing steadily louder. The police arrived with a flurry of activity, their voices cutting through the silence of the house. Emily emerged from her hiding place, her legs unsteady as she made her way towards the doorway. The officers assured her that the intruders were in custody, and her home was now secure. As the adrenaline slowly began to ebb away, Emily realized the depth of the terror she had experienced. She had come face to face with the unknown, with individuals whose intentions remained shrouded in mystery. The thought of how close she had come to danger sent shivers down her spine. In the days that followed, Emily found herself grappling with a newfound sense of vulnerability. The safety of her home had been shattered, replaced by a lingering unease that seemed to follow her everywhere. The memory of those pale faces and the unsettling stillness in their eyes haunted her dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that could lurk just beyond the surface. The chilling encounter had left an indelible mark on Emily's psyche, a reminder that the line between safety and danger was far thinner than she had ever imagined. The feeling of being watched never truly left her, a constant reminder of the night when the darkness had come knocking at her door. Weeks turned into months, and the echoes of that terrifying night continued to resonate in Emily's mind. She had taken extra precautions, fortifying her home and installing a state-of-the-art security system. Yet, despite her efforts, the unease that had settled in her heart refused to dissipate completely. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, sent her heart racing. The sense of being watched had taken root within her, an ever-present shadow that tainted even the most ordinary moments of her life. She began to withdraw from social activities, preferring the solitude of her home where she felt most secure. As winter settled in, the days grew shorter and the nights longer. The darkness seemed to press in on her, amplifying her anxieties. Emily found solace in the glow of her computer screen, immersing herself in online communities and articles that promised tips for dealing with fear and anxiety. She was determined to regain control over her life, to shake off the shackles of that haunting night. One evening, as Emily sat at her desk, engrossed in her online search, a soft tapping sound reached her ears. She froze, her heart pounding. The sound seemed to come from the window, a rhythmic pattern that was difficult to ignore. Slowly, she turned her gaze towards the window, her eyes widening in disbelief. Standing on her front lawn were two figures, their faces obscured by the dim light filtering through the window pane. Panic surged within Emily, her breath coming in ragged gasps. How had they found her? She had taken every precaution to ensure her safety. The tapping continued, growing more insistent. Emily's mind raced, her thoughts a jumble of fear and desperation. She had to call the police, to alert them once again to the presence of these strangers. But her phone seemed so far away, and the distance between her and the window seemed impossibly vast. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily tore her gaze away from the window and dashed towards the living room. Her fingers fumbled with her phone as she dialed 911, her voice shaking as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. The tapping on the window continued, a haunting rhythm that seemed to worm its way into her very soul. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way, that she should stay on the line until the police arrived. Emily clung to the phone as if it were a lifeline, her eyes flicking towards the window every few seconds. The tapping persisted, growing louder, more urgent. And then, abruptly, it stopped. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The silence that followed was deafening. a vacuum of sound that seemed to swallow her whole. She strained her ears, listening for any movement outside. The seconds ticked by like hours, and just as panic threatened to consume her, the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the room. The officers arrived in a flurry of activity, their presence bringing a semblance of relief to the tense atmosphere. Emily opened the door, her legs unsteady as she stepped out to meet them. She pointed towards the window, her voice shaky as she explained what had transpired. The officers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the yard and surrounding area. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity. And then, one of the officers emerged from the shadows, holding something in his hand. It was a piece of paper, torn and weathered. Emily's heart raced as he approached her and handed it over. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words scrawled across the page. "We're always watching." The words seemed to sear into her mind, an indelible message that sent chills down her spine. The officers assured her that they would intensify their efforts to identify and apprehend the individuals responsible. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was far from over. In the days that followed, her anxiety deepened. The presence of those strangers, the uncertainty of their intentions, continued to gnaw at her. She became hyper-aware of her surroundings, her senses on high alert. Sleep became elusive, as every creak and rustle of the house seemed to magnify her fears. Despite the ongoing investigation, the police were unable to provide her with answers. The individuals remained elusive, leaving behind only a trail of unease and uncertainty. Emily began to question her own sanity, wondering if the shadows that seemed to dance just beyond her vision were figments of her imagination. As spring approached, Emily decided that she couldn't live in fear any longer. She reached out to a therapist, seeking professional help to overcome the trauma that had rooted itself deep within her. The sessions were difficult, forcing her to confront the lingering fears and anxieties that had taken hold of her life. With time and support, Emily began to rebuild her sense of security. She took small steps towards re-engaging with the world outside her home, determined not to let fear dictate her life. Slowly but surely, the haunting memories began to lose their grip on her, replaced by a newfound resilience and strength. Years later, as Emily sat on her porch, watching the sunset cast warm hues across the sky, she reflected on the journey she had undertaken. The darkness had threatened to consume her, but she had emerged from it stronger than she could have imagined. The strangers, those enigmatic figures that had once haunted her dreams, had faded into the background of her life. Though the unease still lingered in the corners of her mind, Emily had learned to live with it, to use it as a reminder of her own inner strength. The darkness had touched her life, but it hadn't defined her. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, she felt a sense of peace settling over her. A quiet reassurance that she had the power to overcome even the most chilling of experiences.